Most people picture British intelligence through a narrow lens, a single service, a few famous spies, and a world of tailored suits, secret gadgets, and dramatic field missions. In reality, Britain's national security system is not one agency at all. It is a layered architecture of domestic security, foreign espionage, signals intelligence, military analysis, police enforcement, and central government assessment, each built for a different function and connected through a shared decision-making framework. That difference matters. Public imagination tends to collapse the entire system into MI6 because MI6 is the most visible in popular culture. But the real machine is much broader, and in many ways, much less glamorous. Some parts collect information, some parts interpret it, some parts protect networks, some parts turn intelligence into arrests, policy, or military planning. The power of the system comes less from any single agency than from the way specialized institutions divide labor, share intelligence, and feed a central picture of risk to ministers and commanders. At the domestic level, MI5 focuses on threats inside the United Kingdom, especially terrorism, espionage, and hostile state activity. Abroad, MI6 gathers human intelligence beyond British borders. GCHQ operates in the electronic realm, intercepting signals and defending national cyber infrastructure. Defense intelligence supports military planning inside the Ministry of Defense. The Joint Intelligence Organization and the Joint Intelligence Committee sit closer to the center of government, where raw reporting is turned into strategic judgment for the Prime Minister and the National Security Council. Alongside them, police and crime agencies provide the legal force and operational reach that intelligence services themselves often do not possess. So the British intelligence world is best understood not as a secret club, but as a national operating system. To understand what it can actually do, the first question is not who the spies are. It is how this entire structure is divided, coordinated, and given authority to act. To understand how British intelligence actually functions, the first step is to ignore the popular labels and look at the division of labor. This system is built on a strict institutional separation. Each major agency has a defined operating space, and the efficiency of the whole structure depends on those boundaries being respected. At the most basic level, MI5 handles internal security. Its job is to detect and disrupt threats inside the United Kingdom, especially terrorism, espionage, and hostile state activity. It watches networks, identifies suspects, and builds intelligence cases, but it is not a police force. That limitation is deliberate. MI5's role is to know who may be planning an attack or running a spy network, not to kick down the door itself. MI6 sits on the other side of that line. Its mission begins where British territory ends. Rather than focusing on domestic suspects, it tries to understand foreign governments, armed groups, proliferators, and clandestine actors overseas. In practical terms, that means recruiting sources abroad, running covert relationships, and collecting information before a threat reaches Britain's borders. MI5 is inward-facing security. MI6 is outward-facing collection. Then there is GCHQ, which does not fit neatly into either geographic category because it works through signals. Its domain is the global flow of communications, data, and digital infrastructure. It supports both domestic and foreign intelligence priorities, but through interception, code breaking, cyber operations, and network defense, rather than traditional human sources. This separation prevents duplication and creates specialization. One service follows hostile intent inside the country, Another pursues it abroad. A third maps the electronic environment that connects both. But these agencies do not operate in isolation. Once information is collected, it has to be fused, prioritized, and translated into decisions. And that requires a completely different layer of the system. The bodies that turn separate streams of intelligence into one national picture. But collection alone does not create intelligence. A state can gather fragments from informants, intercepted messages, surveillance teams, military reporting, and police investigations, and still fail to understand what those fragments mean. That is why Britain built a second layer above its collection agencies, an assessment system designed to turn scattered inputs into decisions. At the center of that system is the Joint Intelligence Organization inside the Cabinet Office. Unlike MI5, MI6, or GCHQ, it is not primarily a collector. Its function is to pull reporting from across government, compare competing interpretations, and produce structured judgments for senior decision-makers. In other words, it does not hunt for secrets in the field. It decides what the secrets add up to. The most important output of this process comes through the Joint Intelligence Committee. This body sits near the core of government and is meant to provide ministers with a single authoritative assessment rather than a competition between agencies. That matters because intelligence institutions naturally see the world through different lenses. A domestic security service may emphasize immediate risk. A foreign intelligence service may emphasize long-term geopolitical intent. A signals agency may trust technical evidence more than human reporting. The committee exists to reconcile those perspectives before they reach the Prime Minister. This is also where intelligence becomes policy relevant without becoming policy itself. The committee is not there to tell elected leaders what choice to make. Its role is narrower and more important. Define the threat, estimate capabilities, assess likely intent, and reduce uncertainty as much as possible. That distinction helps preserve analytical credibility, especially when the stakes involve terrorism, war, cyber operations, or hostile state activity. A similar model appears in counterterrorism through JTAC, the Joint Terrorism Analysis Center, which draws from multiple departments to create a unified picture of terrorist threats and set the national threat level. So the British system does not rely on one all-knowing agency. It relies on a chain in which collectors gather, analysts integrate, and central bodies turn intelligence into a common operating picture. But for that picture to matter, it has to move through a system of authority, legal limits, and political control. To understand why British intelligence does not operate as an unchecked secret network, it helps to look at who actually gives it authority. These agencies work in secrecy, but they do not exist outside the state. Their powers, budgets, and missions are tied to a chain of command that runs upward into ministers, departments, and parliament. MI5 reports to the Home Secretary because its mission is rooted in domestic security. MI6 and GCHQ answer through the Foreign Secretary, reflecting their overseas and external-facing roles, even when their work affects events much closer to home. Defense intelligence sits within the Ministry of Defense and supports military planning, capability assessment, and operational decision-making. Above all of them is the Cabinet Office system, where intelligence is coordinated for the Prime Minister and the National Security Council. This structure shapes more than paperwork. It determines priorities. A terrorist plot inside Britain, a cyber campaign tied to a foreign state, and a military crisis involving NATO allies may all demand intelligence support at the same time. But each threat enters government through a different channel, and each is weighed against political, military, diplomatic, and legal constraints. Intelligence agencies do not set national strategy on their own. They feed choices into people who do. That is also why oversight exists in multiple forms. Warrants for intrusive powers require ministerial approval and, under modern frameworks, judicial involvement as well. Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee examines the expenditure, administration, and policy of the main agencies. Investigatory commissioners and tribunals provide additional scrutiny over how powers are used. None of this removes secrecy, but it places secrecy inside a constitutional framework rather than outside it. In practice, that framework is what allows intelligence to be used at scale. A service can intercept communications, run surveillance, or recruit foreign sources only if ministers are willing to authorize risk and defend the necessity of those tools. So British intelligence is not just a collection system, it is an instrument of state power directed through law and political authority. But authority alone does not produce capability. To sustain these operations, the system needs people, recruitment pipelines, and highly specialized training. A system built on secrecy still depends on something very ordinary: staffing. British intelligence is often imagined as a closed world of elite operatives, but in practice, it runs on a broad workforce of analysts, linguists, engineers, case officers, surveillance specialists, cyber experts, and administrators. The mystique hides the scale. These agencies do not function because of a few exceptional individuals. They function because they continuously recruit, vet, and train people for highly specific roles. That process begins with selection. MI5, MI6, and GCHQ all recruit through structured pipelines, looking not just for academic talent, but for judgment, discretion, resilience, and the ability to work inside strict legal and procedural systems. Different agencies emphasize different skill sets. MI6 needs officers who can operate overseas, handle sources, and manage ambiguity in hostile environments. MI5 looks for investigators and analysts able to piece together domestic threat networks and work closely with police. GCHQ prioritizes technical capability, especially in mathematics, computing, linguistics, and cyber operations. But recruitment is only the first filter. Vetting is a core part of capability. These services handle classified material, covert relationships, and national-level secrets, so trustworthiness is treated as an operational requirement, not an HR concern. Background checks, financial scrutiny, security interviews, and ongoing monitoring are designed to reduce the risk of compromise from blackmail, coercion, or divided loyalties. Training, then, turns raw talent into institutional competence. Officers are not simply taught tradecraft or analytical methods in isolation. They are taught how to apply them within a system governed by law, reporting standards, chain of command, and interagency coordination. A case officer must understand not only how to recruit a source, but how that reporting will be validated, shared, and acted on. An analyst must know how to distinguish confidence levels, challenge assumptions, and avoid overstating conclusions. In other words, personnel are not just employees. They are the mechanism that converts legal authority and organizational design into real capability. And once those people are in place, the next question is what tools they actually use, because modern intelligence depends as much on technology and data systems as it does on human judgment. For all the attention given to spies and informants, much of modern British intelligence is built on technology. In today's system, the decisive advantage often comes not from a single covert meeting, but from the ability to capture, process, and interpret vast volumes of data faster than an adversary can hide inside them. That is where GCHQ becomes central. GCHQ's role is often described as signals intelligence, but that phrase only hints at the scale of the mission. It involves collecting and analyzing communications, digital traffic, and other electronic emissions that reveal intent, capability, movement, or coordination. In practical terms, this can range from tracking hostile cyber activity to supporting military operations, identifying foreign espionage patterns, or helping uncover terrorist networks through communication links and metadata. What makes this powerful is not just interception, it is processing. Raw data has limited value unless it can be filtered, translated, matched against known targets, and turned into something actionable. That requires computing infrastructure, cryptanalysis, data science, and close coordination with other services. A fragment of intercepted traffic may mean little on its own. Combined with MI5 surveillance, MI6 source reporting, or defense intelligence assessments, it can confirm identities, reveal timing, or expose the wider structure of an operation. The cyber domain has expanded that mission even further. GCHQ, including structures like the National Cybersecurity Center, is not only concerned with gathering intelligence, but with defending national infrastructure, government systems, and key sectors from intrusion and disruption. In other words, the same digital environment that offers intelligence opportunities also creates strategic vulnerabilities. A clear modern shift can be seen in how national security has moved from watching borders and physical meetings to monitoring networks, servers, platforms, and encrypted ecosystems. The intelligence problem is no longer just who is traveling where. It is who is communicating with whom, through which systems, under what digital cover. But even the most advanced technical collection has limits because machines can reveal patterns without always explaining intent. For that, the system still needs a different asset entirely: human intelligence. Technology can map a network, intercept a signal, or reveal that an operation exists. What it often cannot do is explain motive, internal debate, or future intent. That is why human intelligence remains essential. In the British system, this is the domain most closely associated with MI6, collecting information through people rather than through sensors, databases, or digital interception. Human intelligence is slower than signals intelligence and often riskier. It depends on access, trust, and long-term handling. A source may be a government insider, a military officer, a business figure, a traveler with unusual access, or someone positioned near a hostile organization. The objective is not simply to hear secrets. It is to build a reporting channel that consistently reveals plans, priorities, fractures, and vulnerabilities that technical systems may never fully capture. This is where the public image of intelligence is both partly true and deeply misleading. Yes, there are covert meetings, aliases, and source networks. But the real work is less cinematic and more managerial. Officers have to identify potential access points, judge motivations, protect the source, validate reporting, and decide whether the intelligence is reliable enough to influence policy. A source who says the right thing at the wrong time or provides information that cannot be cross-checked can distort analysis as easily as improve it. Historical shifts show why this matters. During the Cold War, human intelligence was vital for understanding adversary intentions behind closed political systems. In the post-9/11 era, it became just as important in tracking fragmented militant networks where formal hierarchies were loose and digital signatures could be inconsistent. Technical tools could show communications patterns, but human sources could clarify leadership disputes, operational priorities, and which threats were real versus aspirational. So human intelligence fills a gap that technology cannot close on its own. It adds context to data and intention to pattern. But once information is collected, another challenge appears. Intelligence has limited value unless it can be acted on. And in Britain, that usually means handing part of the problem to organizations with legal powers of arrest, search, and enforcement. This is where the British intelligence system reveals one of its most important design features. The agencies that discover threats are often not the ones that neutralize them directly. MI5 can identify a suspected extremist cell. GCHQ can trace digital communications. MI6 can warn of a foreign plot developing overseas. But when the state needs to arrest suspects, search properties, seize evidence, or prosecute a case, it usually turns to law enforcement. That handoff is not a bureaucratic inconvenience. It is a structural safeguard. Intelligence services are designed to collect secret information, often through covert or highly classified methods. Police forces operate under different legal standards, focused on evidence, criminal procedure, and public accountability. Bridging those two worlds requires careful coordination, especially when acting too early could compromise sources and acting too late could allow an attack or hostile operation to proceed. In counterterrorism, this cooperation is especially visible. MI5 may monitor subjects for months, mapping associates, travel patterns, communications, and logistics. But once intervention becomes necessary, specialist police units carry out arrests and searches. The Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command has historically played a central role here, translating intelligence-led suspicion into legally sustainable action. The National Crime Agency also contributes in areas where organized crime, illicit finance, trafficking, and national security threats overlap. The same logic applies to hostile state activity. A suspected espionage network may first appear as an intelligence problem, but if the government decides to disrupt it through arrests, expulsions, asset seizures, or public attribution, law enforcement and broader state institutions become essential. Intelligence can reveal the architecture of a threat. Enforcement gives the state visible means to impose consequences, so British intelligence does not operate as a self-contained strike mechanism. It functions more like the detection and diagnosis layer of a larger security structure. Its success often depends on whether police, prosecutors, border officials, and ministers can convert secret knowledge into lawful disruption. And that raises the next question. How do these agencies decide which threats deserve priority when resources, surveillance teams, and political attention are all limited? No intelligence service has unlimited reach. Surveillance teams are finite. Analysts have limited hours. Technical collection cannot cover every target at once. That means British intelligence is not just a system for finding threats. It is a system for ranking them, constantly deciding which individuals, networks, states, or technologies matter most at a given moment. This process is more structured than it appears from the outside. Priorities are shaped by the National Security Risk Assessment, ministerial direction, current threat reporting, and the judgments produced by central assessment bodies. In practice, that means agencies are not simply chasing whatever is most mysterious. They are assigning attention according to potential harm, likelihood, immediacy, and national consequence. A low-capability extremist with violent intent may compete for resources with a sophisticated cyber actor, a foreign intelligence service, or a proliferation network trying to acquire sensitive technology. Counterterrorism offers a clear example of this triage logic. Not every extremist subject can be watched around the clock. Agencies, therefore, distinguish between broader pools of interest and smaller groups of subjects considered high priority for active investigation. That prioritization changes as travel, financial activity, communications, procurement behavior, or network connections shift. A subject may move up the list quickly if new intelligence suggests operational planning rather than rhetoric. The same applies to state threats. A foreign intelligence officer operating under diplomatic cover, a cyber campaign targeting infrastructure, and a covert influence network may all come from the same country, but they do not present the same kind of danger on the same timeline. Some threats demand immediate disruption. Others require long-term monitoring to expose the larger system behind them. So intelligence work is not just about seeing more. It is about deciding what deserves scarce attention before events force a crisis. Those decisions shape budgets, staffing, collection plans, and the daily rhythm of national security operations. But once priorities are set, the system still has to support them materially, and that leads to a less visible but essential layer of the machine: funding, infrastructure, and the logistical backbone that keeps secrecy operational at scale. To understand the real scale of British intelligence, it helps to stop thinking in terms of secret agents and start thinking in terms of infrastructure. Intelligence is expensive not only because operations are classified, but because classification itself requires secure buildings, hardened networks, compartmented databases, encrypted communications, technical platforms, travel systems, legal compliance structures, and large specialist workforces. Secrecy is not just a method, it is an operating cost. Funding, in that sense, shapes capability as much as law or leadership does. A service with more analysts can process more reporting. A service with better technical systems can exploit more data. A service with stronger surveillance capacity can follow more targets for longer. Budgets determine whether agencies can expand cyber defense, modernize interception capabilities, recruit scarce language specialists, or sustain overseas networks over time. In intelligence, money often translates into time, coverage, and precision. This is especially visible in GCHQ and the wider cyber apparatus. Advanced computing, secure data environments, and technical research require long-term investment, not one-off spending. The same is true for MI5's domestic investigations, which depend on case management systems, regional offices, surveillance support, and partnerships with police. MI6, meanwhile, carries the logistical burden of foreign operations, stations, secure communications, travel frameworks, and the protection of sources and officers operating outside the UK. Infrastructure also determines resilience. An intelligence system must keep functioning during crises, cyber attacks, diplomatic ruptures, or sudden surges in threat volume. That means redundancy matters. Secure facilities, backup systems, and cross-government communications links are part of national security, even though they rarely appear in public debate. The visible operation may be an arrest, an intelligence warning, or a cyber attribution. Behind it is an institutional support structure built to make classified work routine. So capability is never just a question of legal power or strategic intent. It depends on whether the state can finance a permanent, invisible framework robust enough to operate continuously. And once that framework is in place, The next layer becomes clear: how British intelligence connects to military power, because some threats are not just criminal or covert, but openly strategic and military in scale. British intelligence is often discussed as if it exists mainly to stop spies, terrorists, or cyber criminals. But part of the system is built for a wider purpose: supporting military power. When Britain prepares for deterrence, crisis response, or coalition warfare, intelligence is not a side function. It becomes part of the command structure that helps determine what the armed forces can see, target, avoid, and anticipate. This is where defense intelligence enters the picture. Unlike MI5 or MI6, its mission is not defined primarily by domestic security or clandestine foreign collection. It sits within the Ministry of Defense and focuses on military capabilities, battlefield conditions, strategic warning, and the assessment of foreign armed forces. In practical terms, that means tracking weapon systems, force posture, logistics, readiness, doctrine, and the likely behavior of adversaries in conflict or near-conflict scenarios. Its value comes from synthesis. Defense intelligence draws on satellite imagery, open-source material, diplomatic reporting, signals intelligence, battlefield data, and allied sharing arrangements. It helps answer questions that are less about individual plots and more about operational realities. How quickly can an adversary mobilize? What are the weaknesses in an air defense network? Which bases matter most? And how sustainable is a military campaign over time? Those judgments influence procurement, planning, deployment, and alliance coordination. A useful way to see this is through modern coalition operations. British forces rarely act in total isolation. They work with NATO allies, the United States, and other partners, which means intelligence has to be standardized enough to support joint planning while still protecting sensitive sources and methods. That balance between sharing and secrecy is a constant feature of the system. So the British intelligence machine is not only about hidden threats operating below the threshold of war. It is also about preparing for scenarios where power is overt, military, and international. And once intelligence enters that environment, another reality becomes unavoidable. Britain's agencies do not operate alone. Their effectiveness depends heavily on alliances, especially the international partnerships that extend British reach far beyond its own territory. British intelligence is national in structure, but international in reach. Much of its actual power comes not from operating alone, but from being embedded inside long-standing alliance networks that multiply collection, analysis, and technical access. In modern intelligence, partnerships are not secondary. They are part of the core operating model. The clearest example is the UK's role in the Five Eyes partnership with the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. This arrangement is often described in general terms, but its real significance is practical. It allows participating states to share signals, intelligence, technical methods, analytical burden, and in many cases, access to geographic regions or target sets that no single member could cover as efficiently alone. For Britain, this dramatically extends reach. A country with limited size compared with the United States can still operate as part of a much larger intelligence ecosystem. This matters across multiple domains. GCHQ benefits from deep technical cooperation and shared signals intelligence architectures. MI6 works in liaison relationships with foreign services to expand human intelligence access and operational awareness. MI5 relies on international exchanges when tracking threats that move across borders, especially terrorism, espionage, and hostile state networks. Defense intelligence operates within NATO and other coalition frameworks where common assessments can shape military planning. But partnership is never frictionless. Intelligence sharing always raises questions about trust, source protection, legal standards, and national priorities. An ally may possess valuable reporting, but interpret it differently. One government may be willing to act quickly, while another prefers to keep collecting. Shared intelligence can create strategic advantage, but it can also create dependency if a country leans too heavily on what others provide. That is why Britain's agencies must do two things at once: contribute enough capability to remain a valuable partner, and preserve enough sovereign capacity to make independent judgments when interests diverge. In effect, alliance intelligence expands Britain's field of view without eliminating the need for national decision-making. And that leads to the final operational question. Once this entire system is collecting, sharing, and coordinating at scale, how is it adapting to a threat environment that is becoming faster, more digital, and harder to classify by old categories? The British intelligence system was designed in an era when threats could be sorted into cleaner categories: foreign espionage, domestic subversion, military rivalry, criminal activity. That model still exists, but the modern environment has blurred those lines. Today, the most difficult challenges are often hybrid. They mix cyber intrusion, disinformation, covert finance, proxy actors, commercial technology, and deniable state activity into one moving target. That shift changes how intelligence has to operate. A hostile state may not begin with a spy ring in the traditional sense. It may begin with data theft, influence operations, political cultivation, infrastructure mapping, or pressure applied through business networks and online ecosystems. A terrorist threat may involve encrypted communication, low-cost technology, and decentralized planning rather than a rigid command structure. Organized crime may overlap with sanctions evasion, corruption, or strategic smuggling linked to wider geopolitical competition. In each case, the old boundaries between internal security, foreign intelligence, cyber defense, and law enforcement become harder to maintain. For Britain, adaptation means building a system that is faster and more integrated without collapsing the specializations that make it effective. Agencies have to fuse technical signals with human reporting, open-source intelligence with classified collection, domestic leads with international liaison. They also have to respond on shorter timelines. In the digital space, an intrusion can unfold in hours. An influence campaign can spread before attribution is settled. Strategic warning is no longer only about troop movements or formal declarations. It is often about weak signals hidden inside noisy data. This is why intelligence is increasingly about resilience as much as secrecy. The objective is not merely to uncover hostile action after it begins, but to harden institutions, protect networks, and reduce the national consequences of surprise. In that sense, the British system is evolving from a model centered on secret collection toward one that also emphasizes persistent defense, rapid coordination, and institutional adaptability. And that evolution leads directly to the broader strategic reality: what role this intelligence architecture now plays in Britain's place within a far more contested world. In the end, British intelligence is less a collection of famous agencies than a national decision system built for uncertainty. Its purpose is not simply to gather secrets. It is to give the British state earlier warning, better context, and more room to act across terrorism, espionage, cyber conflict, military competition, and strategic shocks. The system matters because modern threats rarely arrive with clear labels. They emerge gradually across borders and domains, and often become visible only when multiple institutions combine what they know. That is why the real strength of the British model lies in coordination. MI5 protects the domestic space. MI6 extends reach abroad. GCHQ maps the electronic environment. Defense intelligence supports military judgment. Central assessment bodies turn fragmented collection into a common picture for ministers. Police and enforcement agencies convert intelligence into disruption when the law must be used openly. None of these parts is sufficient alone. Together, they form a layered apparatus that helps Britain operate in a world where the line between peace and conflict is increasingly blurred. Its strategic value is also larger than immediate threat response. Intelligence influences diplomacy, alliance management, military readiness, cyber defense, and national resilience. It allows Britain to contribute meaningfully to partnerships such as Five Eyes and NATO, while still preserving independent judgment. In practical terms, it gives policymakers a way to understand not only what adversaries are doing, but how quickly risks are changing and where vulnerabilities are forming inside Britain's own systems. The future challenge is not whether intelligence will remain important. It is whether institutions built for compartmented secrecy can adapt fast enough to an environment driven by data saturation, hybrid tactics, commercial technology, and constant digital exposure. The next phase of British intelligence will depend less on myth and more on integration. Faster analysis, stronger cyber defense, better cross-government coordination, and the ability to distinguish real strategic warning from overwhelming informational noise. That is the strategic reality. Britain's intelligence system is not a hidden world apart from government. It is one of the core mechanisms through which the modern British state perceives, prioritizes, and protects its place in an increasingly contested international order.